Well, welcome to the 8th installment of our study in the book of Hebrews, and we're going to be looking at chapter 7 today. And we have finally come to the chapter where I have been promising to do a little bit more talking about the name Melchizedek. He's been mentioned a few times in previous chapters in Hebrews, but this chapter really talks about him a lot, and so now's the time when we really need to grasp who Melchizedek was and why he is even part of the Bible, and why is Jesus compared to him at this point in Hebrews. So let's begin with some history of who Melchizedek is. The earliest point he's only mentioned two other times in the Bible, in the book of Genesis and in the book of Psalms. In the book of Genesis, we get the actual story where he shows up in history, and it's a kind of strange, and so we're going to look at this a little bit here and break it down a little. Now, the story is that this is not too long after Abraham and Lot, his nephew, have split locations in the future promised land. And Lot has gone to live in the Jordan Valley, he's camped out near Sodom, the city of Sodom, as in Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham is camped out with his people, animals, possessions, whatever, in the hill country. So, the story here in chapter 14 in the book of Genesis chapter 14, we're only 14 chapters into the Bible. And apparently there are four kings, and I'm not going to bother reading their names and the cities that they are kings of, but there are four kings who kind of decide to work together against another five kings, and they basically, the four subjugate the five, and two of the five subjugated kings are the kings of Sodom and the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah. After putting up with this for 12 years, in the 13th year, these five kings decide that they're going to rebel against the four original kings that are subjugating them. And they lose. They lose badly. And the four kings go into the five lands, the five city-states that these five kings represent, and basically take everything. Take everything and every person and take them away captive. Unfortunately, one of the people that they took was Lot, and his family and his possessions and his animals and everything. And someone who escaped this carnage got to Abraham and told him what was going on. So Abraham, with a couple people he is allied with, puts together an army of 318. I think it was 318. Yeah, 318. And they go against these four kings who have now taken Lot captive. And they beat them. And they get back Lot and all of that is his, and free all the other people. It doesn't necessarily say that they got all of the household stuff, all the possessions of all the other people, but they freed them all. So Abraham now has, his mini army and Lot and all of that, and they're heading back home, and they get to the city of Salem. And this is where I'm going to start reading, and I'm going to read I'm going to start reading chapter 14 of Genesis, verse 17. Okay? After Abram returned from defeating Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed he, God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. And then it goes on to say, the king of Sodom said, Give me the people and keep all the goods for yourself. But Abram refused to keep any belongings. All he wanted was, I have taken an oath that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the thong of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abram rich. I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten and the share that belongs to the men who went with me, to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, his allies. Let them have their share. And so that's it. Those 18, 19, and 20 are the only moments where we're looking at Melchizedek, the king of Salem. And he is the priest of God Most High and blesses Abram. This is before Abram's name has been changed to Abraham, which is actually in the next chapter. So, and this is also before Ishmael. I mean, it's before God makes his final covenant with Abram and changes his name to Abraham and changes Sarai to Sarah. Anyway, okay, so here's Melchizedek, king of Salem. Why? I mean, he has nothing to do with the 4 kings that subjugated the 5 kings and the battle and the taking and the none of that, except that he comes out with some bread and wine and blesses Abram. Obviously, the blessing shows that he does worship the true God. Interesting. Abram is not the only one who believes and worships God. Apparently, the king of Salem also does. Now, let's look at his name, Melchizedek. Melchizedek, I'm not going to go through all the technical stuff. You can do your own research if you want to. His name is derived from 2 words or 2 concepts. King of righteousness, righteous king, so it's king of righteousness, or a king that brings righteousness, a righteous king. That's his name. Well, that's convenient, and it's a good name for someone who's worshiping God and actually focusing on the true God. And then we get to the name of the city. And the name of the city is Salem. And Salem actually means peace. I actually looked some of this up and looked up the derivatives and all this because it's actually important. Salem is, to their language, what in Hebrew would be shalom, which most people understand that shalom means peace. But if you're going to look at the completeness of it, here's what Salem comes from shalem. It's a verb, or the verb shalem has the same root as Salem. And the verb means to make whole or complete, righteous recompense or proper restitution. And of course, shalom, the noun, shalem is the verb and shalom is the noun, and it means wholeness, completeness, peace. There are derivatives of Salem. The noun shalem means peace offering. The verb shalem means covenant of peace. As an adjective, shalem is perfect, whole, complete, safe. The noun shilem, recompense. Nouns shalmon, shilum, shiluma mean reward or proper recompense. So here we have righteousness, recompense, or proper restitution, something that's whole, complete, which gives a peace. It brings a sense of peace when you are made whole, when you are made complete, perfect. It's like all of these words are derivatives of Salem. So the city of Salem is the city of peace, the city of completeness, of restitution, of wholeness, of a covenant of peace. Interesting, huh? Well, guess what? Some of you might know this. Some of you, this might be the first time you realize it. Salem is the old name for that city. You might recognize it as the modern city of Jerusalem, or as we pronounce it, Jerusalem. Jerusalem. Well, Jeru is actually another word, or in Yerushalem would be more of the Hebrew sound, and the verb of yada is bringing about a unifying effect, bringing about a unified effect. Or the noun yore is rain during the first period of the agricultural year when seedlings not ready to give or bear fruit. And yada is a verb. It's the same process as yore, but it's from the soil's perspective, to revere or pay heed in reference of what is being received. So yada, or Jeru, is talking about bringing a unifying effect. And agriculture, in agricultural society, they would understand it's the rain and the seed combining with the soil and bringing forth a unified effort and bringing forth fruit, or bearing fruit. So Jerusalem, Shalom, basically means a complete righteous recompense, restitution, wholeness, completeness, peace that is a unifying effect that brings reverence and pays heed to that peace, that completeness. So Jerusalem, Yaru, or Yada Shalom, is the city that this King Melchizedek is the king of. One who brings peace and recompense and restitution and wholeness and completeness, a unifying effect. So that was a lot of background stuff, and I just thought it was very interesting to really look into that aspect. But back to what it actually says here, and let's look at it one more time before we skip on to another portion that talks about Melchizedek. Again, verse 18 of chapter 14 of Genesis. Then Melchizedek, king of righteousness, king of Salem, king of peace, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed he, God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. Here we see the first time where it's interesting, bread and wine is brought out. which later and during Holy Week, Passover, you have the Jesus saying, "This is my body and this is my blood," using the afikomen aspect part of the Passover Seder, which represents the lamb that was shed, who shed his blood to save them from the angel of death in Passover, and that's a whole other thing. The lesson, which if you want, I did do a English and a Spanish Seder last year. This year we're going to be doing them live. Yay! But they're always there to reference back to. And then the blood of the lamb, the cup of redemption, is when Jesus said, "This is my blood." So here is the first time we see bread and wine brought out. No reason. It just happens to be what he brings out. But he blesses Abram by acknowledging the true God and acknowledging that it was God who delivered Abram's enemies to him, rather than all Abram's big to do and big ability. And I think at this point is when Abram recognizes that this king of Salem, this Melchizedek, is different from other people that he is surrounded by, people who might not be God acknowledgers. And so he gives him a tenth of everything that he has just received. Abram is not going to keep any of it for himself, but he gives a tenth to this king of Salem who has acknowledged that God is the one who brought this about, this victory. And it's almost like Abram is doing this as an acknowledgement of that blessing. So he is being blessed by Melchizedek, priest of God Most High, king and priest. This is another aspect to notice. This is the first time you have a king and priest together, mentioned together. This is who Melchizedek is. He is, as far as God is concerned, he is the king that God has placed, and the priest that acknowledges God. And throughout Israel's history, they never have a king and priest who is the same person. They have kings and they have priests, but not a king and priest together, again, until Jesus. That's something important to bring with us to Hebrews. But at this point, it looks like Abram is acknowledging that blessing from Melchizedek, and that's why he gives him a tenth. He is acknowledging that it was God who did it, and so he is offering a tenth in recompense to God, as a way of thanking God. And that's everything that we have in Genesis. But now we jump over to Psalm 110. And this would be David writing. It says it's a Psalm of David. And it looks like it's a prophecy of the coming Messiah. I mean, the first verse says, "The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." And it goes on, different ways of acknowledging the coming Messiah, describing them. But then it gets to verse 4. "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." This is, again, in the middle of a chapter in Psalm that is one of those that is considered a prophecy, acknowledged as a prophecy of the coming Messiah. And in the middle of it, he says, he has sworn and he will not change his mind. You, Jesus, the Messiah, are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And that's an important phrase, in the order of Melchizedek. There are many, or some, not many, but some people who, and I've been doing, reading different people's accounts and thoughts about Melchizedek and all of this. And there are some who insist, and really, they're reading some things into the very little scripture we have, and ignoring that phrase, in the order of Melchizedek. There are people. Let me explain. There are people who are Bible teachers who have studied this and have decided that because he is mentioned in Genesis and in Psalm and in Hebrews, that this Melchizedek was actually Jesus. And I have a big problem with that because of several things. First of all, Melchizedek was the king of an actual city. Jesus first arrived in human form in Bethlehem, hundreds of years later, 1,000 years later, than Melchizedek. I don't see an entire city. I don't see Abram not recognizing if it was someone other than a man, a good man, a man who was king and priest of God Most High, but he was a man. He was human. Now, some people say that because this is true, that to Jews, lineage is very important. And in Genesis, it makes a point to mention that there is no lineage for Melchizedek. Before or after, there's no descendancy or ancestors. There's nothing. And so they say, well, that proves that it's like Jesus. He had, he wasn't human. He was different. He wasn't human, or else they would have had a lineage. Except in that same chapter, when they name these 9 other kings, the 4 that go against the 5, and the 5 that fight back and that get defeated, and the 4, none of them is mentioned with a lineage either. Because lineage, the importance of lineage hasn't really come to be. We have Abraham's lineage back to Adam, but Shem and Adam, but it's the next chapter where Abraham starts having a lineage and has Ishmael, and then later Isaac, and then of course Isaac has Jacob and Esau, and Jacob has 12 sons, and blah blah blah, and you have the 12 tribes of Israel, and Israelites, Jews will keep their lineage from that, but just because Melchizedek doesn't have a named lineage doesn't mean that he wasn't human. It was just not important to the coming Messiah. The lineage of the coming Messiah was going to be more important than Melchizedek's, because Melchizedek was a man who happened to be king of Salem and priest to God Most High. Okay, so I'm not going into this one camp of people who think that it was Jesus here for the first time. Other times when there is a presence of angels, or possibly even Jesus taking human form but not being human, is not far later in Genesis, when the 3 men come and sit with Abraham, and then 2 of them go on to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham has this conversation with the 3rd one, and in that part of Genesis, it becomes pretty aware that the two that went on to Sodom and Gomorrah to oversee the destruction of them were most probably angels of whatever level, who knows. And the one who stayed behind with Abraham, who had questions and wanted to talk to him and say, if 50 righteous people are found, will you still destroy the city? And that whole conversation, that was probably a pre-flesh but human appearance of Jesus, most probably. But even if it was just another wild angel, Abraham was aware that these men were different. He didn't see that in Melchizedek. So that's another reason why I, say, when Jacob fought an angel, he knew it was someone supernatural. It wasn't some man he was just fighting. There are times in the Old Testament when people in the Old Testament are in conversation or in presence of supernatural beings that appear to be human, but they are aware there's something different about them. Melchizedek, there's no mention of that at all. As far as Abram was concerned, king of Salem, and he was someone who worshiped God. Point. Now, it's like all of that to bring us to chapter 7 in the book of Hebrews. Chapter 7, book of Hebrews. And because we've done so much of that background, this should go pretty quickly. And I might, I hate to do that, but I might cut it because we're getting to almost a half hour, and I don't like it to be more, I like it to be between 30 and 40 minutes tops. And so we'll see where we get to. So let's begin with chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. Hebrews. This Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him, and Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, his name means king of righteousness. Then also king of Salem means king of peace. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, like the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Just think, I'll stop there. So that's basically what we've already been talking about. That's why I knew that once we talked about Melchizedek and Salem and all of that aspect and the Old Testament references, we could go through this pretty quickly. So let's continue with verses 4 through 10. Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. Now, the law requires the descendants of Levi, who become priests, to collect a tenth from the people, that is, their brothers, even though their brothers are descended from Abraham. This man, however, did not trace his descent from Levi, yet he collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. And without doubt, the lesser person is blessed by the greater. In the one case, the tenth is collected by men who die, but in the other case, by him who is declared to be living. One might even say that Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth through Abraham, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in the body of his ancestor. Okay, let's start with that last line. Levi was still in the body of his ancestor. Remember, Levi is one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and Jacob is one of the 2 sons of Isaac, and Isaac is the one of the sons, but the promised son of Abraham. So when descendants of Levi accept the tithe of the nation of Israel, the Jews, the children of God, they are basically like representing, as if they were giving it was giving to Abraham, who gave it to Melchizedek. Because the descendants of Aaron, or descendants of Levi, who will become priests are mortal. And we do know their lineage, and we do know that there is a mention of their births and deaths, and families can trace their ancestors back to Levi if they are of the priest family. Whereas Melchizedek just shows up and is never mentioned again, or rarely mentioned again. Yet it's kind of, they're saying, okay, they're about to say, because this whole book is comparing Jesus to others. I mean, let's look back. Let me switch back. And in chapter 1, he's being compared with angels and how he is superior to angels. Then he is compared to the heroes of the Old Testament. And then he found greater. Then chapter 3, he's compared to Moses, the patriarch that everyone practically worships, because he gave them the law. He brought God's law to them. Jesus is compared and found to be superior to Moses. And then it talks about the Sabbath rest and how Jesus is our great high priest. And then we kind of switch into gears talking about this, how he's this greater high priest than all these others. Why? Well, chapter 7 is saying because he's a priest like Melchizedek was a priest, in the order of Melchizedek. Not that he was Melchizedek, but he is a high priest in the order of, or like Melchizedek was. Melchizedek has no end because it's not important. It never is mentioned. Whereas Jesus will also be the priest with no end. And that's coming up in this next section. So let's jump into verses 11 through 17. If perfection could have been attained through Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it the law was given to the people, why was there still need for another priest to come, one in the order of Melchizedek, not in the order of Aaron? For when there is a change of the priesthood, there must also be a change of the law. He of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe has ever served at the altar. For it is clear that our Lord descended from Judah, and in regard to that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. And what we have said is even more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears, one who has become a priest not on the basis of a regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of an indestructible life. For it is declared, quoting Genesis 22:17, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So here, again, remember, Hebrews is being originally written for Christian Jews, Messianic Jews, who are thinking about rejecting Jesus and going back to Judaism. And here is saying Jesus is so much superior priest than any of those Jewish priests. Those from the lineage of Aaron, lineage of Levi, they have nothing on Jesus, who has always been and will always be, who is priest in the order of Melchizedek. It's as if Melchizedek never stopped being. Well, Melchizedek wasn't a descendant of Levi. He wasn't even a descendant of Abraham. He was a contemporary. So he was from a totally different lineage. And yet, God acknowledged him as the priest, as his priest. So, it's talking about how this new Messiah, Jesus, our new high priest, is similar to Melchizedek in this aspect. He is not a descendant of Levi. He is, or Aaron. He is a descendant of Judah, and like I said, in regard to that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. priests were coming from the lineage of Levi, Aaron specifically, and not from Judah. That was another one of the 12 sons of Jacob, totally different lineage. So, but he was going to be a superior one. And with a new kind of priest, a new non-lineage needing priest, comes a new covenant, a new law, a new way of doing things, a new way of being. And so if you are the Messianic Jew who wants to reject Jesus as the Messiah and go back to Judaism, you are going back to something that is null and void. We are already into a new covenant, into a new direction, and the old is obsolete. Also remember that that Jesus died approximately 40 years before the destruction of the temple. And this book is written before the destruction of the temple, probably in the 60s. So in less than 10 years, that temple is going to be destroyed. Why? It's obsolete. It's not necessary. God gives Israel a generation to recognize that their new high priest and their new sacrifice is through Jesus and not through the temple. And then finally, like I said, it's an obsolete building, and the Romans come and destroy it and take away Jews as captives and send them all over the place. And, so you don't need them because we have Jesus and a new way of things, a new covenant, and a new priest who will never die, never need to make sacrifices for his own sin. It just goes on and on. And let's continue reading because I'm getting into what's coming up. Verses 18 through 22. The former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless, for the law made nothing perfect, and a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. Others became priests without any oath, but he became a priest with an oath when God said to him, quoting Psalm 110, verse 9, "The Lord has sworn, and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." Because of this oath, Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant. Yeah, he is a guarantee of a better covenant. Important message being shared and given. Continuing, verses 23 through 25. Now, there have been many of those priests since death prevented them from continuing in office, but because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. And then the last few verses of the chapter. Such a high priest meets our needs. One who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests men who are weak. But the oath, which came after the law, appointed the Son, who has been made perfect forever. Jesus. We're going to continue talking about Jesus as our high priest and this new covenant. But this is where we see how Melchizedek works into the description of this new type of priest who is not immortal, who lives forever, who is not from the old law, but a new covenant, and a covenant that will be forever, and that he is holy and blameless and pure and set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. I mean, this is the perfect king priest that we could ever hope for. Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. And let that be our lesson for this week, our study of the chapter 7 of the book of Hebrews. And next week, we'll go on to chapter 8 and continue looking into this aspect of Jesus as our high priest and this new covenant, this new better covenant, this new better high priest. May the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Until next week, God bless.